for the report, do we have to add the executive summary?
Yes, we do. Not the report, at the proposal,
Yes.
but later on for the assignment. Can we talk about the assignment during the break?
Yeah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Now, thank you for those who turn up on time and be punctual. Now, I just wanted to give others a chance to come in, so I've waited for a couple of minutes already, so I will make a start now. Now, very good to see you all. I know it's getting to the busy part of the trimester, so it is very well done that you're able to attend class. Now, is it too loud? I'm having to do the recording, so do forgive me. I'm wearing the lapel mic, the microphone, so that I can do the recording. Now, I thought the professor's lecture will be recorded as well, but it turned out that only the Tuesday morning one will be recorded. So I have to be really diligent to make sure that the recording is being recorded, the lecture is being recorded, so that the online off-campus students can have the benefit of listening to the lecture recording. So do forgive me if I have to constantly speak into the microphone, because I'm very much aware that the online students rely on the recording for their study. So welcome back to week 3. Topic 3 is a very important topic. Some of you may have gathered it by now by reading your assignment notes, working ahead. You would see that topic 3 is a very, very important one for your assignment. Now, may I just have a bit of indication? How are we going with the proposals? Good? Going well? Okay. Anyone majorly struggling with the proposal? If you are, please do come and see me during the break. Now, previous trimesters, when I work with other unit chairs, they usually would allocate a 1-hour consultation per week with me, but the professor, being the unit chair, he's actually doing the consultation. So do make a time to see the professor if you're ever having any problems. I understand he posts his consultation information regarding the time and details on Cloud Deacon's site. I think in the news announcement, if I remember correctly, it's like 1 to 2 or something on the Tuesday, but do check in terms of his announcement of his availability. Now, we are here to help you, but because I no longer teach full-time, I don't have an office upstairs, I'm not based here, I only come in and deliver the class, and then often I leave. And I also teach at the Waterfront Geelong campus. So if you want to see me, best to see me during the class break time, before class, after class. I'm always here outside before the class. After the class, I always take time to talk to you if you have any questions. But do understand that the consultation is to be done with the professor, Professor Chatty, our unit chair, so do make a time to see him. If you cannot make it during his allocated time, I'm sure he will try to accommodate, but do send him an email. Now, I think he preferred for messages regarding the study in general nature to be posted on Cloud Deacon. Now, I've been receiving emails from students, and where possible, I try to address them, but because the unit chair looks after all the administration plus extension assessment, all the other queries, I tend to have to then let the students know and then refer the email on, not because I don't really want to help you, it's because I've been instructed to do so. So, just a bit of sort of housekeeping issues. Now, we've covered topic 1, globalization. We've covered topic 2, culture. Both weeks we had speakers coming in, so our class time really got cut short. As you will realize, this is a course that is very content heavy. Now, it goes against the way that I would like to run the classes. Where possible, I want to run it as interactive, engaging, experiential as possible. Being a master's level, you really don't want to just have a lot of PowerPoints. But having said that, there are people, students that want structure, and if we don't give them structure, they get really upset. Where's the content? I pay good money for this, where's my content? So it's a compromise. So let us work together during the trimester, but understand my potential limitations in that I have to deliver a course that meets different needs of students. So some students don't even get a textbook, so they rely on the lecture notes, so the lecture notes are quite heavy in content. Having said that, when they have speakers coming in, that means our class time is shorter. Then you need to catch up on any slides that we haven't quite got around to deliver or discuss, such as topic 1, globalization, which I mentioned before. Very important topic. Without any failure, every single year there's a topic, there's a question in the exam on globalization. I doubt it will be different again this year, because being such an important topic that goes across all the discipline, all the different studies, different units, you really need to understand globalization. So if you haven't got around to read up on topic 1, you really need to. And remember, the professor came up with a list of questions, and in class I even tried to discuss some of the key concepts on globalization. Topic 2, the role of culture in international business, which we just covered last week. And again, I had a guest speaker that came in, which means our in-class time was again cut short. So the last bit of slides we didn't get to go through. And so I thought that it's only appropriate I prepare you by coming up with a list of questions, which I also shared with the professor, and he also put up a list of questions. So to start off with, I think it's good to do a recap of topic 2. Now, if I ask you the first question, what is culture? Give me a definition of culture, then describe the determinants of culture. I think you can all do that, can't you? Now, we all understand culture, yet when we try to articulate culture, sometimes we struggle, because culture may mean different things to different people. Okay, so is it Amanda? I'm trying to learn the names. You see, Professor gave me a class list, so I'm looking at the class list and trying to remember some names. Some students I have had the privilege of teaching in the past from other units like ethics, so very good to see you. Welcome again. Others I'm getting to know better. Amanda, if I can call upon Amanda to give us a little bit of definition, your own definition of what is culture. Okay, a society or group's values.
And way of doing things.
Way of doing things, very good. Anyone else? I'm going to pick on someone who I remembered. Ronnie, I remember your name after class the other day.
Culture, just what we get to learn from the others, like from our peers or even from the traditions.
Okay.
Which has been followed in a particular way.
Traditions, all right, very good. I pick up a key word that you said, because culture means different things to different people. Now, Grant, what do you think culture means to you?
It's the norm of how things works in a place.
The norms, okay. Values. Okay.
And the unwritten social rules.
The unwritten social rules. Okay, that's very good. Now, once we start talking about culture, you can see culture can mean different things to different people. Now, Australia is a fairly young country compared to other countries. If you talk to people from a more sort of ancient country where there's like years of tradition, there's the influence of history, they will define culture differently. And yet we all know what culture means when we talk about culture. Now, this gentleman in the middle, you told me your name the other day.
I'm not going to repeat it.
I will remember later, so don't tell me. Tell me, what's your definition of culture?
Well, for me, culture, coming from a country like India, I would say culture is something that influences the tradition of the country.
Okay.
Like, there have been certain practices or certain norms or rules that have been practiced in India for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure. So culture takes time to develop. And we all know what culture means, but what determines culture? Now, recap, go back to topic 2, week 2 lecture notes. There was a diagram that actually tell you what are the determinants of culture. And if I remember around slide 14, I'll bring it up to show you. The reason I'm showing you this is because if you read the notes just passively, you will not remember anything. Whereas if you actively try to think about the concepts and then apply your knowledge to analyze a case, a phenomenon, chances are you will have a better understanding. Determinants of culture from last week's notes. We just heard from the students what culture means to them. Norms, values, traditions, informal rules, something unspoken, something that we know, but yet we may have difficulty explaining what culture means. People from within that culture, you don't even need to explain. You understand what it means. People from outside of that culture may struggle to understand what are the norms, what it means to be part of the Indian culture, the Australian culture, the Malaysian culture, the Sri Lankan culture, all that, right? However, what determines culture? Religion? Religion plays a very, very important role. It influences the way we behave. It guides us in terms of our moral compass, what is right, what is wrong, which I will talk about a bit more in the later part of this week's lecture on ethics. Social structure. Now, I talked about social structure last week. In some cultures, the social structure is very, very hierarchical, very marked. The system is actually a closed system versus some other culture, the system is more open system. You can move between different classes. Language. How many languages are there in India? More than 100 languages. Languages is the essence, very important, of how we communicate with each other. If you have more than 100 languages, imagine the richness and the diversity of the culture. Someone from a mono kind of culture, like, more like Australia, we have subcultures as well. It is also quite diversified with migration and all that. However, there's that dominant culture, and we speak English here. But if you go to a country where there's such diverse richness of culture, even so many different languages, people from outside of that culture may not fully understand. Political philosophy. If you think about the political philosophy, the government of the country, okay, that can actually influence how a society runs. Economic philosophy. Some are more like open type of economy driven by market. Others are more centrally planned. All these play a role in influencing and determining our culture. Will culture change over time? Yes? Now tell me, Amanda, why do you say yes?
Because, well, I use the Australian experience and the culture has changed with multiculturalism.
Yes.
There are still those who will not move with that, but then there are others who are very open to multiculturalism
Sure.
and have embraced it and then taken on bits and pieces of every culture and enjoy that aspect of Australia. So yeah,
Yes.
that's it very much.
Very much so. Now, has Indian culture changed? Yes. Why do you say yes?
Like with the passage of time, many traditions which were old practice in India have now been abolished.
Okay.
Like for example, like there was probably Sati Pratha, which was back in India, was a prominent one.
Right.
Which has been abolished now
Mm-hmm.
because of it's like culture now. In culture, it's very rich, but now people
Sure. Okay, so becoming more westernized, maybe influenced by other culture. Education. Do you think education play a role in determining culture? Vidu? I got your name right this time. Sorry for calling you a different name the other day. So tell me about Sri Lankan culture and why do you think education can actually influence Sri Lankan culture, for example?
Sri Lankans have a strong, long history as well
Mm-hmm.
to Indian culture, most
Right.
of it. And through I think education, a lot of beliefs have changed. In terms of working, like in the cities, the culture has changed because when you look at the villages and so on, they like worship the languages and stuff like that.
Right.
But when you educate yourself throughout the years, things have changed. Like the working culture has changed and so on. So I believe throughout the years, education has changed the mindset.
Okay, so education can change people's mindset. It can change people's attitudes. It can maybe demystify some things. Previously, we might worship our bosses, but if you're educated, you may understand that it's not really necessary. You know, our attitudes can change. Mindset is very powerful. Mindset is very important. So can you see what I'm doing? I'm trying to get you to look at the study material in a much more lively manner by simply asking you questions. So this week I ask you, what is culture? Define culture. Describe the determinants of culture. That can very well be a short answer question in the exam. Okay. But when you think you understand the concept, try to answer some of these questions. Now, I'm aware Professor put up a list of questions, which I'm going to show you next, but this was what I prepared initially for our discussion in class. So, how may culture influence international business? How do you think culture can influence international business? Yes. Very good answer. Very good answer. Yes. Every country's rules and regulations are different, and it could also be influenced by our culture. And so when we do business with other cultures, do business with other countries, we have to be aware of that. All things equal, culture play a very, very important role. Now, if we are ignorant of the host country culture, and yet we're going to go into that country and operate in that country, now we're going to run into problems. Quite often, companies would employ a local HR manager. Why do you think they would employ a local HR person? They understand the culture much better than, say, the expatriate. That's right. So they would need someone local who understands the culture, who have perhaps the knowledge of the history and education, contacts, all that, to really understand how to manage the people better. So culture can influence international business. It can also make or break a deal. So what people nowadays have to understand is that you don't just rely on all these other data, commercial data, all these, everything is important, but culture is also very important. So more and more, we are witnessing people putting emphasis on cultural training. Now, if we were to send an expatriate to manage an operation overseas, depending on their term, how long they're going to be overseas, they often have some sort of cross-cultural training. If they're going to be there much longer than a few months, they usually have a more in-depth type of cross-cultural training, like an immersion type of training. Question 3. describe Hofstede's 5 cultural dimensions model. Now remember I said to you Hofstede is very important last week. So do you know what are the 5 different cultural dimensions? Do you remember them? Using Hofstede's 5 cultural dimensions, compare the culture of 2 countries, and I just randomly picked 2, Australia and India. So if you don't remember Hofstede's model, I'm going to show you from last week's lecture notes. Okay, this is last week's lecture notes. Hofstede's cultural dimensions. He identified 4 workplace values, which later he added another one. Power distance, which focuses on how a society deals with the fact that people are unequal in physical and intellectual capabilities. Individualism versus collectivism. You remember I stood in this room and I said, if you're Indian, tell me about Indian culture, how individualist, how collectivist is it? Then you made me walk. No, I made myself walk and you didn't let me stop and I keep on walking and almost hit the end of the room, right? Versus, say, Australian culture and Amanda stopped me. I didn't reach the end of the room on individualism. So, individualism versus collectivism focuses on the relationship between the individual and his or her fellows. Uncertainty avoidance measures the extent to which different cultures socialize their members into accepting ambiguous situations and tolerating ambiguity. Masculinity versus femininity look at the relationship between gender and work roles. And then later, we have Confucian dynamism. Okay. Now, remember last week I talked about the different concept of time when I used to do cross-cultural training and I was working with time managers and say a lot of Austrian, German managers, and the concept of time is very different. When we say meet up for the next session at 2 o'clock, at 1:45, the German managers are already there. The time managers may be starting to come in at around 1:15. So the concept of time is very different. So, why do I mention Hofstede? Because you would need to understand it. It's a very important piece of work and research. Now, there's limitations of his research. There's a lot of criticism around Hofstede's work as well. However, it is still something that we can use to compare and contrast different cultures. You will need it for your assignment as well. If you talk about social culture of a country, which you will need to do in your country reports, the part 2 of your first assignment, the first part is to come up with a proposal of a product or a service to look at how best to take that product or service into 3 different countries, 1 each person. The second part is to come up with your own individual country report, which you need to look at all the different factors, including culture. And one expect that you will at least have a look at Hofstede's cultural dimension models. So if we were to compare, say, India and Australia, you'll be able to see the difference when you have that kind of example provided. So when we compare, I just lost it. When you compare India and Australia, you'll be able to see for yourself what I mean by cultural dimension. Okay, so let us have a quick look at the 4 different cultural dimensions of Australia and also India. So here, in terms of power distance, Australia scored 36. India, on the other hand, scored 77. can you see just based on one cultural dimension, India and Australia is so different. So therefore the two cultures, without a doubt, will be very, very different. So if you're an Australian manager trying to do business in India, but not understand the Indian culture, you're going to run into problems. How can you manage the local workforce and all that? How can you negotiate with people? How can you communicate effectively without offending the counterpart? Let us look at uncertainty avoidance. Australia scored 51, okay? India scored 40, that's less of a marked difference there, but there's still a difference. Individualism, collectivism. So in terms of individualism, Australia scored 90, India scored 48, which means India is less of a individualist society. Masculinity, femininity, or in terms of masculinity, Australia scored 61, India scored 56. Now, you can read up a bit more about Hofstede's cultural dimensions and try to understand it a bit more. But I just want to remind you in terms of what we studied and how you apply this new knowledge to analyze your case studies that we're going to study during the trimester or even your assignment. Or to think about how you communicate with your peers in class or in your other assignment groups. Next, we're going to look at high context and low context culture from Hall. Hall's model on high and low context culture to do with communication. So if we were to look at two different cultures, let's say between China and America, okay, one is more high context in culture, say China, versus say America, low context. What would it mean? What would it mean for the two different cultures and how do they communicate with each other? So if you have been studying your notes, you should pick up on these concepts. Now in high context cultures, this is last week's notes, attention is paid to the surrounding circumstances for the interpretation of the message. The information is understood within the culture. Now in these cultures, words cannot be taken literally. And not knowing the hidden meaning behind the words may lead to embarrassment and misunderstanding. A lot is in the unspoken. Okay, so I mentioned this to you before. Many of my international students may not ask me questions directly during the class time, but they may choose to come and see me privately afterwards. And, you know, very courteous, respectful. It is different. Their communication styles are different. My local students would probably just tell me directly in my face during the class time. Okay, so the value and emphasis on communication is very different. So in low context cultures, most of the information is conveyed in the messages itself, not so much of the body language or the kind of embedded meaning. People in these cultures are more interested in the straightforward type of communication. So imagine if you're from a high context culture and you're trying to communicate with someone from a low context culture, typically most Western cultures, and you're like being really respectful, you're not being really direct because you don't want to risk offending the person, but the person is perceiving you as not forthcoming, not direct, not really honest, yet you're an honest person, but it's just that you're very respectful. And the cultural influence play a role here, even in the way we communicate with each other. So they may be saying, tell me, yes or no, can you do it? And you're like, you don't want to offend the person. Whereas in high context cultures, they may say, oh, yes, we can do that. But in actual fact, they don't want to do it. Or they have a difficulty saying no to you. So good communication in the context of low context cultures is one that is direct and doesn't leave much room for interpretation. Whereas in the high context cultures, people tend to be more polite and a lot of the emphasis isn't just in the messages itself. It's also in the way that the messages are delivered to you, the non-verbal cues, the body language, how you say it, and all that. So you need to be aware of low context cultures and high context cultures differences, how we communicate with members from each of the high and the low context cultures. Okay. Question 5. Culture can play an important role in international business, so managers should try to develop cross-cultural literacy. Please comment and provide suggestions on how might we develop this literacy. Okay, what does it mean? Now, if you were to go to my notes again from last week, okay, you will see that we already talked about cross-cultural literacy right from the beginning. Successful international managers need cross-cultural literacy. It is an understanding of how cultural differences across and within nations can affect the way in which businesses are practiced. Okay, so we need to almost have that kind of understanding. It sometimes can be unspoken, could be gained through experience, but sometimes you need to work hard. You may not have a lot of time, and an international business manager needs to have that kind of mindset, the kind of open mindset in order to develop cross-cultural literacy. They need to work on being, open to different cultures. So they cannot just assume that people will just understand them and things will just work out. They can just use their power to exert whatever influence. Every culture and society differ. Okay, so there are important implications that flow from these differences. We need to understand there are differences and we need to be open-minded, authentic about it, be sincere and do our homework to understand the host country culture much better and to ensure that we have a good understanding about the culture. Focus on the similarities rather than differences. Understand, appreciate the differences, but focus on the similarities and try to build that connection and try to work on how to build that common ground. Okay. So I kind of gave you a very quick summary and revision on topic 2. All right? A very quick summary and recap of topic 2, the essence of topic 2. Now I want to show you Professor's questions. See if you can understand the questions better now. Now, I did say to the professor that I'll be giving you some questions and I'll share my questions, but this is more like exam questions that you could potentially receive. My one's more like a summary, direct, recap the concepts so that you understand what you're actually studying. But here, Professor has worded into almost exam-ready type of questions. Now, this is already posted on Cloud Deacon under week 2 for you. But when you first read the questions, explain why culture of a country may influence the cost of doing business in that country, illustrate your answer with examples. You may be thinking, oh, what do I do? What do I do here? It's a bit complex. Second question, choose 2 countries that appear to be culturally diverse. Remember my example of India and Australia. Compare the culture of those countries and then indicate how cultural differences can influence cost of doing business in each country and the likely future economic development of that country and also business practices. So in the exam, you would need to respond to both A, B, and C. Okay, and you need to also think about which theory could you potentially refer to, or framework, models, and all that. Typically, cultural factors drive the differences in business etiquette encountered during the international business travel. In fact, Middle Eastern cultures exhibit significant differences in business etiquette when compared to Western cultures. Can you identify 5 tips regarding business etiquette in a country of your choice and have cultural significance or can be culturally sensitive? Now, when you read a question like that, you might be wondering, where do I begin? Yet you already have the answers. Okay. If you refer to Hofstede's cultural dimension model, you'll be able to understand that question and answer that question very well. Question 4, culture and communication are intertwined and can greatly affect international business. Think about the relevance of cross-cultural communication in international business negotiations. Compare and contrast. You know, compare is to look at the similarities. Contrast is to look at the differences. So in the exam, if they ask you to compare and contrast, they want you to discuss the similarities and the differences. In terms of the communications between high context cultures, which I just discussed with you, and low context cultures, and then to give examples of how international business negotiations between high and low context cultures may be stalled for cultural reasons. We kind of just talked about that. Imagine someone from low context cultures wanting to know everything. Tell me, what is it? And yet someone from high context cultures are having difficulties being really open and direct because they are worried that they may offend their counterpart. So the cultural orientation and the thinking and the mindset is very different. The attitudes are very different. What we consider to be polite in one culture, respectful and all that, may come across to another culture as less authentic, not really honest. So we have to be aware who we are communicating with. If we are communicating with a high context culture person, sure, behave like that. But if you're communicating with a low context culture person, maybe you have to be just direct. Tell him, no, I can't do this. Or yes, be really direct. But at the same time, the person from the low context cultures need to be aware of the cultural differences and be much more respectful and patient with the person from high context cultures. So we need to understand what we mean by low and high context cultures and how that would influence the way we communicate. Culture can play an important role in international business, so managers should try to develop cross-cultural literacy. Please comment and provide suggestions on how might we develop this literacy. I trust that you can answer all these 5 questions now that I've gone through with you. So please do have a look at them. Now the professors posted this set of questions on Cloud Deacon under week 2 to help you revise for your topic 2 study. So I kind of just made it a bit more direct and simpler so that you can see directly in terms of what you are learning, you can apply to answering those questions. So this week's lecture is on political, economic and legal forces, social responsibility and sustainability. Now there is a video case to do with the later part of the lecture material, social responsibility, or rather ethics, on Nike. So some of you may have viewed the video, others may not. I hope to get the time to show you quickly and we can then discuss in smaller groups and then share our responses, like what I do with the case studies, which we didn't really get to do in week 1 and week 2 because we had guest speakers on both weeks coming in. Now, as I mentioned, this week's lecture is very, very important. The notes are already up on Cloud Deacon under week 3, so please access the notes. It covers actually 3 chapters, chapter 2, chapter 3 and chapter 5. There's a lot of reading to be done, but not difficult. They are useful because you can immediately apply to your assignment. You're working on the country report next. So the first part is on national differences in political economy, chapter 2. The learning objectives. By the end of this topic, we want you to be able to understand how the political systems of countries can differ. Okay. Also understand how the legal systems of countries can differ. Economic systems of countries can differ. Now immediately I can come up with 3 short answer questions to ask you. Discuss the different political systems in the world. Discuss the different legal systems in the world. Discuss the different economic systems in the world. Now, every year there's at least 1 short question that come out on this part. And we pick. Maybe we ask you about economic systems. Maybe we ask you about legal systems. Maybe we ask you about political systems. We need to know that there are different economic systems in the world. Some are centrally planned, others are more market-driven. There are different legal systems, civil law, common law, religious law, all right? Different political systems, and all these can influence the way we do business. And so hopefully by the end of this topic, you have a better understanding in terms of how the understanding of all these different political, economic, and legal systems help you as a manager, as a leader, as an entrepreneur to navigate through the complexities of international business. Now, political economy is a term that stresses that political, economic, and legal systems of a country are interdependent, okay? They interact and influence each other, and in doing so, they affect the level of economic well-being. And it is important for us to understand that every country have different kind of way of doing things, including the way the government conducts themselves and how they run the country. So the political system here, we refer to the system of government in a nation, mainly assessed around 2 different dimensions: the degree to which they emphasize collectivism as opposed to individualism. And I gave you the example last week, India versus Australia. One is more collectivist, India, Australia being more of an individualist, and also the degree which they are democratic or totalitarian. Okay. Now we need to understand that in a democratic society such as Australia, we have freedom of speech, we have a more market-driven economy. There's a lot of things that we take for granted, issues around human rights, the way that we interact with our bosses may be very different to some other cultures, some other countries. So some other countries you may have not much freedom of speech. You may not be able to elect your government. There may be a dictator that runs a country. So it's very, very different. And we need to be aware that political systems, economic systems, legal systems, all work with each other in the way the country is run. Okay, so there's that interrelationship between all these. And that's why we're looking at the differences between all these different political economy, legal systems, and economic systems. Now, we talked about collectivism, individualism. So what do we mean by that? Collectivism, okay, so the degree to which we focus more on the collective good of the majority, not so much of the individual gain. People from collectivist culture understand that. I don't even have to explain to you what it means to be in a collectivist culture. You just behave accordingly, you just behave naturally that way. If someone is more senior than you in the organization, you defer to them. The way you speak to them will be different, the way you communicate and all that. And maybe even the way you advocate for yourself or not advocate for yourself. Individual rights are sacrificed for the good of the majority. And it may be norm to you without thinking because you're from that culture. But it may be something really strange and foreign to others from an individualist culture. Now, in the modern world, collectivism is more expressed through socialism. In terms of the other end of the spectrum, individualism is the direct opposite. So I gave you the example last week, India versus Australia. And the other gentleman said, keep going, in terms of if the line of continuum on one hand is collectivism, on the other hand is individualism. And I was just keeping going to represent Australia. But Amanda stopped me around here and said, no, Australia is not totally individualist. There's elements of collectivism as well. It's not too extreme individualism. Whereas you didn't really want to stop me, and I kept going with India, right, almost to the end of the spectrum with collectivism. People from that culture understand what it means to be Indian culture, to be Australian culture. Okay. So you need to understand that in terms of the political system, we are needing to think about the degree to which they emphasize collectivism or individualism, whether they're democratic or totalitarian. Now, in terms of individualism and collectivism, socialist ideology is split into two broad camps. In terms of communism, communists tend to believe that socialism can only be achieved through violent revolution and totalitarian dictatorship. But more and more we are not seeing that, all right? Even traditionally communist type of countries like China, Russia and all that are becoming more open. It's different, it's more like socialist, more milder nowadays, not so much the extreme forms. Social democracy has the Marxist roots. So state-owned enterprises run for public good rather than private profit. We are seeing a lot of countries also changing. China is a communist country. Yet, if you go to China, you may not realize you're in a communist country. It's actually very, very advanced and westernized. Of course, there's a difference between the more rural areas versus more the city areas. But if you're in one of the major cities like Shanghai, it's no different to another Western country. Very, very modern, very, very advanced. Yes? Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, North Korea will be an example of communism. A lot is changing. Now, if you study international business, you need to be aware of some of the trends, some of the changes that's occurring over time, even as we speak. That's why the professor encouraged you to read the news to see what is happening around the world, because a lot of the times things just change. Probably not so much the culture. Culture can't change overnight. Now, this brings me to remind you about the assignment. In your country report, there is an expectation that you will do some forecasts, particularly on the economic data. There's also an expectation that we want to see some trend data. Now, I will talk to you a bit more about the country report later on, but after this week's submission of your proposal, you will soon be working on the country report. The product and service proposal is due end of this week, Friday. As soon as you submit it, don't wait for feedback. Start working on your country report. Okay. Some students will give me the excuse or reasoning, well, I haven't got my feedback yet, and so I can't really work on my country report. Why not? Why can't you work on your country report? You already know which countries you are working on for your proposal. So say the 3 team members, one work on America, one work on India, one work on, say, Thailand. Start working on the research information on Thailand, you know, if you're doing Thailand, America if you're doing America, and so on. So India if you're doing India, China if you're doing China, there's no stopping you. Oh, remember last time I said that we are inviting the librarian? She has said to me that she will be coming. I believe it's next week, week 4. So don't miss the lecture because she'll be showing you some useful tips on how to navigate around the university databases to find information. There's a lot of useful industry, government reports that you can access free of cost. You don't need to pay for it. As part of Deacon study, you can access those information, and that will save you a lot of time on working on your country report. So there's that expectation that you will do some forecasts and provide some trend data, particularly the economic indicators, because data of one particular year doesn't tell you much. If you tell me the economy is good in China, how can I believe you? If you just show me economic indicators of 1 year, it doesn't mean much. But if you show me the economic indicators of 5 years, then I can see whether it's growing or it's declining. Right? So you say to me, the economy is booming. For 1 year, double-digit growth, maybe subsequent years, there's a drop. So we need to see trend data of about 5 years. Okay, so just to let you know, now there is a template which Dr. Jane Menzies has prepared and I've shown you before, and I'll remind you one more time. Do refer to it under the helpful hints of assignment 1. So in terms of democracy and totalitarianism, in terms of democracy, government is by the people, exercised either directly or through elected representatives. The elected representatives hold accountable through safeguards. Now, people in a democratic society would understand what it means. We elect our government. Many of us will elect our government, not so much of political sort of parties, but more so in terms of their policy. What can they do for this country? How can they run this country well? Now, in some other countries, you may not be able to elect your government. There may be some sort of regime that controls everything. You may not have the kind of things that we take for granted, the freedom of speech, the free media, regular elections, limited terms for elected representatives, a fair court system that's independent from the political system, non-political state bureaucracy, non-political force and armed service, free access to state information. All these things that we take for granted in Australia, right, living in this society. Yet to many others from other countries, this is something really new, something that you may not even experience. So in terms of democracy and totalitarianism, totalitarianism is the other side. So basically one person or one party that exercise absolute control over all realms, all spheres of human life in that country. People don't really have much say in that type of cultures. You know, you may not have the freedom of speech. The example of North Korea, you know, people have to behave accordingly. You may go to election, but there's only one person you're electing, one party. So very, very different. Exactly. It's really interesting exercise. I thought about that too. Maybe it's to demonstrate they're very progressive. They still get it right, but then... That's my understanding. That's my understanding. Maybe it's to demonstrate to... Maybe it's a gesture. The fact that you even get to tick the box. It is interesting, isn't it? Something that we cannot comprehend. However, it's perfectly the norm in that country. So, you may wish to read up a bit more on totalitarianism, different types, communist totalitarianism, okay? There are examples like, you know, say North Korea, maybe even Cuba. Theocratic totalitarianism, more ruled by a religious leader. So many, maybe even religious countries like Islamic countries. Tribal totalitarianism, many African nations used to be ruled by tribal leaders. Right-wing totalitarianism, less influence nowadays, but in the past maybe Germany, Italy, many of those European countries in the past were more right-wing. Now, this is something really important for you to consider in international business in terms of the risk involved in doing business in another country. If you're going to venture into another market, another country, you need to be aware of the risk involved. You need to consider this for your assignment as well. In fact, it's a big plus if you do talk about it. When you assess the political risk, we are talking about changes in the political environment that can, negatively affect the value of the firm's activities in that country. Let's say if you're going to actually suggest in your later part of your assignment, assignment 2, which you need to come up with a company strategy, entry mode for your chosen market. Remember, assignment 1, part 1 is a product or service proposal. So once you get that approved by your evaluator, it could be me, it could be Salil, it could be Sumit, or it could be, I think, Ali, another marker. Remember I said to read the evaluation comments and see if you understand their comments. I would always sign off with my name. Again, I say that, so if you don't see my name, it's not marked by me. But read the comments and see if you understand it. It should tell you if you have areas that you need to work on. Sometimes we might ask students to resubmit their proposal because the countries of choice might not be feasible, or your idea might need to be clarified more. You might just say, we propose solar solutions. But what are you actually proposing? Are you coming up with the engineering design? Are you coming up with the solar panels? What is it that you're marketing? What are you going to take? A physical, tangible product, or a type of service you're providing, venturing into, say, 3 different new markets. So we may ask you to then clarify and work on your proposal a bit more to make your product or service idea a bit more concrete, a bit more clear. Or we may say, well, have you thought about the choice of 3 countries? Can they really afford your type of products? Why? Because the economy hasn't been too good, for example, okay? Or maybe are you sure that, they will be receptive of your type of products or services that you're advocating for? And in assessing the suitability of that country, which is the next part, the country report, you need to think about the type of risk involved. So political risk are any changes in the political environment that may negatively affect the value of the firm's businesses there. So if a country is politically unstable, okay, there's social unrest, there's, civil war happening, are you sure you want to take your business there? Can they even afford to buy your products or use your services? Right, and what type of risk are we talking about? So more on political risk, it can be ownership risk, operating risk, transfer risks. So in terms of ownership risk, if you set up some sort of operation there, what if you set up a factory and the government decide to confiscate it later? It can happen, right? So you need to do your homework first ahead of time. You need to understand a bit more. What about operating risk? You need to operate within that country. You need to be sure that you are not going to run into problems. You're not going to have the police come and stop you from opening shop, or you're not going to have, gangs coming to harass you, whatever it may be. And when you do generate profit, when you do make money, are you able to then send back your profit to your home country? Transfer risk, repatriation of profit. Now, sometimes students don't even talk about this, but it is a very important consideration. Why do we do business? Why do we do business? To make a profit. So if we operate in another country, we want to ensure that the profit that we make in that country, we can actually transfer back or some way use up the profit. So we need to know whether there's some risk of transferring the profit or not. Now, I want to get you to look at a website called Export and Finance Insurance Corporation. You should have a look at it because they do look at the assessing political risk of different countries. I might actually have a link later to show you as well. So it's shortened as EFIC, E-F-I-C, Export and Finance Insurance Corporations. It's a good reference for you to refer to for looking at political risk. Examples of political risk. So I mentioned, properties, assets can be confiscation. Maybe there could be campaigns against foreign goods, all right, to protect their local businesses. So you may have loss of sales. You may have increased cost of public relations. You may have problems in terms of continuing operating in that country. Oops, sorry about that. I will find my microphone again. Yes. Oh, sorry. EFIC. I think it's in another page, which I'll show you in a sec, but it's not here, but it's EFIC if you just Google search. Okay, you're welcome. So, what if they have civil war in that country? You could potentially lose all your investment, right? You may not be able to continue to operate successfully in that country. You may even have safety kind of issues for your workers, your employees, yourself. So you need to do your kind of checks before you decide what is the best option for entering that new market. Maybe the only way that it will work with that country, with that market is exporting. Or maybe you might argue, but then again, it's worthwhile investing in green fuel. We might want to set up a subsidiary there. We might want to set up a factory there. What about inflation? Is inflation level high or low? These are the economic indicators that you need to look at. Now, sometimes we get those country reports and students just give a very superficial coverage of the economic factors. They don't even talk about inflation. What is the inflation rate of your chosen country? You need to know that, right? We need to understand, we need to assess holistically, is that country of your choice a suitable one? You say the economy is booming. You give me data of 1 year. How can I be confident? But if you give me trend data of 5 years, then I can see whether the economy is really booming. What is the inflation like? Here I mentioned repatriation of profit. Okay, can you really transfer funds freely? Currency devaluation, which can occur. Now, I mentioned forecasts. We want you to do forecasts for your country report. Forecasts of economic factors are more important than forecasts of, say, cultural factors. Culture is unlikely to change overnight, but economic, the economy can. What about taxation rate? What is the taxation rate in that country? How high is the tax rate in that country? How can you be comfortable without knowing the taxation rate of a country that you're operating in and yet say, this is a perfect choice for our business? You need to consider all this. So this is the web link. I mentioned EFIC, Export and Finance and Insurance Corporation. Have a look for their country profiles. They actually come up with country profiles and you can find out a lot of information on your chosen country. Okay, save you a lot of time. You should use good websites like EFIC, like DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Australian Bureau of Statistics, rather than some odd websites or blogs that you refer to. Okay. And Sharon, our librarian, will talk to you a bit more about searching strategies, how you navigate through all the digital resources online at Deakin University. We have lots of valuable resources that you can refer to. Chances are if you do a Google Scholar search, Google search, you might be able to find a lot of information, but its whole article or whole report, and it may actually ask you to pay. But you don't need to pay. We have all this information that you can use within Deakin University. So Sharon, our librarian, will be coming next week, and she will guide you on how best to navigate through all these resources, teach you some searching strategies and so on. Do have a look at Global Political Risk Index, or political risk services through our university databases. Now, as I mentioned, there's an interrelationship between economics, politics, legal systems, right? So there's a connection between political ideology and economic systems, whereby countries where individual goals are given primacy foster free market economic systems. And in fact, it is said many Western countries prosper as a result of that, because we are able to have entrepreneurship, innovation. Countries where collective goals are given primacy show marked state control of markets. Imagine you turn up to work, everyone clock in, or everyone turn up to work, whether you work hard or you don't work hard, you clock off at 5 o'clock. Everyone do the same. Why should you work hard? There's no need to work hard, right? So if I'm mopping the floor, I'll just go, drag the mop across the room. If I'm a cleaner of a shopping centre, I'll just, But if I'm being reviewed and evaluated on my performance, on the other hand, and I might get a bonus, or I might be rewarded for my hard work in some way, I'll be mopping away really rigorously every corner, right? So it influences our behaviour. So there is that connection. So we need to understand in terms of what it means about these different interrelationships. Market economy, command economy, mixed economy. Many Western countries have what we call market economy. What is produced and in what quantity are determined by the supply and demand of the market, signal to producers through a price system. So, for example, the consumers might want more of this, less of that. Then, there's that more of that demand, less of that demand. Now, in terms of command economy, generally more centrally planned by the government, right? Traditionally, China has been a communist country for a long time, still a communist country, but more and more it's changing, becoming more market-like. But they still have 5-year plans, 10-year plans. The government plan out, and aim for certain targets. We want this X percentage of growth. We want to achieve that. Now, in some cultures, some countries, they do everything according to plan, right? In some are more driven by the market. And we have also the ones that are more sort of a balance of both. Australia is a bit of the mix. Now, there are different legal systems in the world. What type of legal system exists in your country? Common law, more from the colonial Commonwealth countries, based on the case-by-case type of systems, based on precedents. What happens with the previous case set kind of a precedence. And there's also the civil law system, codified. All right, so if there's theft, you get X number of years. Everything is written down. All right, if you have some sort of wrongdoing, you get this sentence. Everything is written down, codified. Now, many European countries use the civil law. Other countries also have religious law, theocratic law. The religious laws dictate how things are done, and if there's any wrongdoing, what type of punishment. Some countries may have both theocratic law and another law. So you need to understand what type of legal systems are we dealing with going into that country, and what are the implications for business. What does it mean if your contract is drawn up under that jurisdiction? So you have to be mindful of this. If it's a contract drawn up under the civil law system versus the common law system, what are some of the implications? And what do you need to do? Because the legal system of a country has immense importance in international business. If you have any disputes, you need to know what to do. You need to know what are some of your rights and how to go about resolving some of these. So like economic systems of a country, the legal system is influenced by prevailing political systems of a country. So as I said, it could be based on case type of systems or things that are written down. And so therefore, if things are written down, judges may be, just using that set of codified rule to pass judgment, whereas if it's a common law type of system, it's based on sort of case system, it may be different. So you want to know where you should set up your contract, for example. And maybe you need to write everything really clearly in the contract if there's room for interpretation. Whereas in a civil law type of system, there's less room for interpretation because everything is codified. The contract may be potentially shorter versus, say, in a common law type of system. So common law evolved in England over hundreds of years based on tradition, precedent and custom. So judges have the power to interpret the law so that it applies to the unique circumstances of your individual case. On the other hand, the civil law, very detailed set of laws organized into codes. Courts interpret civil law with regard to codes. More than 80 countries operate with civil law system, including Germany, France, Japan, and Russia. Now, judges have much less flexibility than those with the common law. So there's merit in both as well. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Any lawyers in the room? No? No one? No one wants to own up to be a lawyer? Okay, so you'll know a lot more about law, and you may have expertise or experience working in the kind of commercial setting in dealing with different countries' legal systems. You may have stories to share with us about, potentially some losses or gains of your company that resulted from, kind of interpretation of the law or as a result of setting up the contract in one particular country versus the other jurisdiction and so on. Theocratic law, based on religious teachings, Islamic law, the most widely practiced theocratic legal systems in the world, although both Hindu and Jewish law are also practiced, based on moral behavior. What is morally acceptable? What is right and what is wrong? Okay, and we'll talk a bit more about that. Now, for my past ethics students, you will understand the topic very well, moral behavior. Contract law is the body of law that enforces a contract, specifies conditions under which exchange is to occur, details the rights and obligations of both parties. Now, we have to be very careful about our contract, as I mentioned, under which jurisdiction. Should there be any conflict? Where do we, which country's law, do we follow? How are we going to resolve any potential disagreement? So dispute resolution can be quite complex in international business because we're crossing national boundaries. Sometimes, dealing with different countries. So where to arbitrate and whose laws apply? The validity of contracts and decisions. So one cannot not be too careful around contract. So next time before you sign anything, be very careful. There's serious consequences for yourselves, for your company. The role of United Nations Convention on Contracts for International Sales of Goods, CISG, I think there was a typo error. It was listed as CIGS in your slides. So it's a United Nations Convention on Contracts for International Sales of Goods. Basically, if there's any international dispute, originally I think we had like 62 member nations. Now it's something like 89. So if there's ever a dispute, people would take it to like almost like an international kind of court system to get it resolved. So you need to be aware. Of all these implications of what you're dealing with. What you're dealing with could potentially make money for your company, or it could actually lose money. Now, when you go into another country, you need to be aware in terms of whether you can actually own properties, your company can actually set up shop there, and whether you can actually, own anything. So here we're looking at property rights, refer to the bundle of legal rights over the use to which a resource is put, over the use made of any income that may be derived from that resource. Property rights can be very, very important. It can be violated through two different ways. Private actions of individuals or government officials refer to, say, theft, piracy, blackmail, and the like by private individuals or groups of that country, versus public action, public officials such as politicians, government bureaucrats openly extort for income. Now, we will talk a bit more about corruption in other countries and issues around bribery as well. That could be every day of business life in certain countries, whereas it's probably something that we don't see as often in this part of the world. Doesn't mean that we don't have problems. We do as well. But we need to be aware of all this. So you may wish to comment on some of this in terms of your legal systems, legal factors in your country report of your assignment, because you need to know whether, if you're going to set up operation in that country, can you actually own anything? What are some of the law around property rights? Okay, this is good resource for you to refer to, the World Map Corruption Index, Transparency International. If I click on it, the World Corruption Index, it should work. I know the second link didn't work, so I put in another one to show you. Now, all these slides are already preloaded by the unit chair and the Learning Innovations people. So you would have a copy on Cloud Deacon under week 3. Okay, so here, if you click on sorry about that. Okay, so if you click on, say, a country, say Libya, it gives you the ranking in terms of corruption perception index, ranked 170 out of 176 nations. So has the value of 14. The higher the number, the least corrupt. The lower the number, the more corrupt. Okay, so ranked 170 out of 176 nations. On the other hand, Canada, score 82, ranked 9th corrupt country in the world out of 176. So least corrupt, not very corrupt at all. So it's a good tool to find out a bit more information about your chosen country, because you need to also understand the level of corruption there, because it will also affect the way you do business. Australia. Okay, so not very corrupt. And so it's worthwhile for you to refer to Transparency International, and if you do refer to it, the market will say, well done. Glad to see that you have referred to it. Foreign bribery from an Australian perspective, now I clicked on that and it didn't work, but I found another one just to show you international anti-corruption efforts. Basically just to show you Australia's position. We say no to corruption and bribery. So here, there's a little bit of information. The Australian government is also committed to promoting the use of OECD guidelines of multinational enterprises and their effective and consistent implementation through the Australian National Contact Point. So basically you can read up a bit more about the efforts in terms of international anti-corruption and Australia's position on corruption and bribery. We say no to corruption and bribery. In fact, it's breaking the law. If an Australian manager was to be found to accept bribes or give bribes, it's against the law. Okay, so I'll get you to read up a bit more on that. So we need to know in international business that if we're investing into a venture, if we're going into a new market, we need to ensure that, you know, our intellectual property is going to be protected. Now, in some parts of the world, intellectual property is not, the regard for intellectual property rights is not the same as, say, in Australia, right? So intellectual property laws are very important because imagine you spend all this money in research and development to come up with something innovative, something really clever, and then it can just be copied, right? In fact, in many parts of the world, you know, you could just buy, in the past they buy CDs just on the side of the street, you know, music. In fact, there's even the artists or in the entertainment industry, you can almost work out how popular they are in terms of how many pirated copies are out there, right? Nowadays, you probably just download. You don't even buy CDs anymore. Whereas we don't see as much of that in, say, Australia, and we have stricter intellectual property laws, or shall we say maybe it's more being enforced. There's more of that policing factor. Because on the other hand, you can have the laws, the rules and regulations, but whether they enforce it is another thing. So protection of intellectual property rights differs greatly from country to country. So internationally, under this World Trade Organization, we have what is generally accepted patents would last and should last for 20 years. Copyrights 50 or even 70 years. I think under the previous arrangement it was 10 years, and then trademarks. So if you have worthwhile creation, innovation of something really unique, you should patent your design. You should ensure that you get to reap the benefits of your invention. So these are all very important for international business. Now, we need to ensure there's property safety laws that set safety standards for products and manufacturing processes. Now, in Australia, if you're buying food products, pharmaceutical, medicinal products, you can safely consume them. You can feel very comfortable that the Panadol you're getting is really paracetamol, right? It's not some other weird substance. You can be very comfortable that the food you're purchasing in the supermarkets is not going to be contaminated with E. coli. The yogurt you consumed this morning is good life strains of bacteria that's going to do you good rather than do you bad. The medication, the health supplements you're taking, from the vitamins that you buy from pharmacy are not going to be heavily contaminated with heavy metal. There's all these checks and balance in place, and we are proud of our quality of our products, Australian-made products. Maybe a little bit more expensive, all right, compared to say other countries, but good standard. We have strict rules and regulations. In Australia, we have the good manufacturing process, the Therapeutic Goods Act that governs that. So you can safely consume your product. You don't even have to worry about purchasing, and for example, an Australian-made bottle of vitamins or a food item that you purchase in the supermarkets that's locally made and so on. Product liability laws hold the firm and its officers responsible for product safety standards. Very important. Now, as consumers, we have rights and we need to be sure that we are protected, right? So you need to be mindful of the different laws that would hold you accountable for your operation, for your business venture. You need to insure your company just in case if something goes wrong. Criminal law, civil liability laws, so the law to actually punish or to, potentially hold people accountable for any wrongdoing. So civil law call for payment of monetary type of damages, whereas the criminal liability laws result in fines or imprisonment of the high up people. Now, you have to be aware of this because as international managers, you are likely to be responsible for a lot of these activities. And in fact, in ethics, we talked about executive compensation, executive pay. Remember, in ethics study, some of my students will remember. And why are we interested in that? Because some may argue that, the executives get paid so much money, the CEOs. And is it even reasonable? Is it fair that they get paid so much and the average worker get paid so little? But think about if something were to go wrong with a company, who do we hold accountable for? The management, the senior executives. We are not going to hold the factory worker accountable for, we're going to hold the CEO accountable for, right? So if there is a major happening, something that goes wrong, it's not going to be the person down the bottom that we hold accountable for. So the argument is also that they should be given that kind of level of remuneration and compensation because they do deliver on the outcome and they have a huge responsibility. You may agree, you might disagree, and that's perfectly fine, but that's the argument. We're coming up to chapter 3, but I'm aware that you've been sitting down for a long, long time. Could we take a 10-minute break? Yep, stretch break, fresh air, all that, and then we'll come back and we'll continue. Okay, we'll make a start again. Now, I received a lot of questions around your product or service proposal. Now, during the break, was meant to be a 10-minute break, but we exceeded the 10 minutes because I received a lot of questions around your product or service proposal. So students were a bit concerned and they wanted to ask questions around that. That's perfectly fine. As I said, I don't actually get to have the consultation with you. So if after today's lecture you still have questions around your assignment, please don't hesitate to post a question on Cloud Deacon and Professor Chatty will respond to you because this trimester the professor is looking after the consultation plus all the online queries by himself. So don't hesitate to post a question to Cloud Deacon, questions of more personal nature, send an email to the professor. Now, the common questions that I've received during the break is around your product of choice, how much to talk about your product or service. You need to give a little bit of introduction. We need to be able to read your proposal and know what it is that you are proposing. Is it a tangible product? Okay, is it a real product that you can actually take into another market? Is it a concept? Is it a service you're providing? The hiring of sports, say snow skiers or what, you know. So you need to give a little bit of introduction around what type of product or service you're providing. You are an Australian company. That's about it. If you read the assessment brief, it says you are to assume that you're an Australian company based in Australia, venturing into other markets. So it can be an idea of a product or service from another place. It could be a totally new idea of a new product. It could be an existing one. Having said that, you may decide to market our Australian type of products or natural resources or agricultural goods, whatever you decide. Or it may be a product that you have in your home country, you haven't seen it in Australia, and you think, well, you know, that's a perfect opportunity, I could come up with this. Back home in India, we have this, but it's not available here in Australia. Why don't I say I'm company ABC, an Australian company, I'm going to take this product, I'm going to manufacture in Australia to utilise the good public image and perception of Australian-made quality products, even if it's Indian origin, and take this product to other countries. All I want to see, or what the market wants to see, is that you give a good rationale of your choice of 3 countries, bit of introduction about your chosen product or service. So if I read your proposal and I cannot understand what is your chosen product or service, if that is the case, then I will ask you to resubmit, because I don't even understand what is your proposed product or service. You know, you can be vague, but not so vague, okay? You know, in this case, you only got 500 words, so don't be vague, be direct. Write a succinct document. It's a product or service idea. Why? Why have you, out of all these thousands of ideas, why have you picked this one? Why? Why is this product a good product or service idea? Why have you picked this one? And why have you picked these 3 countries in particular? Because of good economy, because of what, you know, what? So maybe decide on a few different things that you're going to talk about briefly in your proposal. Cover page, 3 student names, IDs, subject unit, MPM735, International Business Management, so that it's clear. Now, take pride in producing a good piece of work, professionally presented. Less important in this initial piece, but later on, because it represents you. Okay, do you know how often we receive work and I don't even know who are they from? You don't even put your name down. Come on, tell me who you are. So put your name, your student ID down. I can go by the submission box and, oh, okay, well, Vidal submitted this. Who's in his group? I have to go and look it up, right? So give me a cover page. It doesn't take long, just one single cover page. No need for fancy art, but, you know, just who are you? Which group number 3. Then your introduction of your product or service idea. Which 3 countries, why? Why these 3 countries? Okay. And if it doesn't make sense, we will ask you to resubmit and submit within like 2-3 days. Don't despair. Chances are we just want you to make it a lot clearer, because it would then help you with the second part of your assignment. If you don't even know your idea at this very initial stage, you're going to struggle later on. Because if you don't even know, if you're so vague that you don't know what's your product, how can you then work out which best strategy to adopt or entry mode to recommend for your assignment 2? Okay, so just spend a little bit of time, talk to each other about your idea, come up with a good idea, and off you go, the 3 countries. All right, before the break, we covered chapter 2. As I said, there's a lot of content. Chapter 3, political economy and economic systems, economic development. So I'll try to go through quickly. Learning objectives. You need, at the end of this topic, you will be able to explain what determines the level of economic development of a nation. Discuss the macro political and economic changes taking place worldwide. You need to be aware of the changing trends, what is happening between some of these developed nations and developing nations. Describe how transition economies are moving towards more of a market-based type of economies. Articulate the implications for management practice of national difference in political economy. Now, as a manager, you need to understand the implications of management, implications of business, because you need to manage people, you need to conduct business. Describe some of the threats of personal security that can arise in international business and explain how these difficulties of culture, politics, society and security can affect international business operations. So there are different things that can determine the economic development of a country. Different countries have dramatically different levels of economic development. 2 common measurements of economic development, we use GNI, gross national income, which now superseded gross national product, GNP. So gross national income is a common measure of economic development of a country. So measure of the total annual income received by residents of a nation. So it superseded GNP, which is the market value of all the final goods and services produced by the national economy. Now, we don't need you to regurgitate terminologies, definitions, but you need to at least have some understanding of some of these concepts. Your textbook would give you a lot more information, and as I mentioned before, at least try to have a copy of the text, whether you borrow from the library or from someone. And as I say always, I will have my copy here in class. You can come and borrow during the break, but I do have to take it with me. I do have an edition 11, which someone's going to borrow from me tomorrow. And I'm more than happy to lend out my text as long as I get it back. I'm more than happy to do that. So purchasing power parity, which account for the cost of living in countries. So one can adjust GNI as per the purchasing power parity, and it will make more sense because you take into consideration the differences of cost of living. How much does it cost to cut haircut in India? Haircut. As you can see, I haven't cut my hair for a long time. Haircut.
$2.
$2 Australian dollars. Wow. Gee, my goodness. The minimum here will be around 20, 15 if you're lucky, or 30 for gents. For women, it's much more costly. In some shopping centres, I think the cheapest I've seen is what, $10? But not common. $2. So cost of living will be very different. So things will be really expensive here when you first arrive. You look at everything, you're like, wow, so expensive. So we need to take into the account of cost of living, the differences, so therefore we could adjust GNI using PPP. So if you look at country comparisons of GNI, the first column is the different countries, and then the second column the GNI per capita, the third column GNI PPP per capita, and then the GDP growth rate, and then the size of economy in GDP of billions of dollars. Now remember what I said, whatever data already printed is dated. Not to mention this is really, really old data. So you need to look up the most recent data. In your country report, if you use data that's more than 10 years old, no. Okay, don't go there. Because they're going to say it's not even relevant for now. Maybe if you study history, yeah, we want to see the economic development, we want to see what's it like for the past 10 years, but not for the current business. You want to know up-to-date information, so try to find data from the last 5 years. When you say trend data, try to provide for the last 5 years or so. So as you can see, GNI per capita can be misleading, that it really doesn't take into consideration the cost of living, whereas when you adjust for cost of living using PPP, you can allow for more direct comparisons of living status in different countries. So the GNI PPP per capita will tell you a lot more the real story of living in that country as compared to, say, just GNI per capita. Okay, so what you need to learn is when you look at data, you need to be able to analyze the data. In fact, in your MBA study, there is a unit that actually asks you to study statistics and how to evaluate data and all that. Now, some students have been complaining to me last trimester, oh, it's so difficult. Why am I doing this? I'm really struggling. But it will really help you. Whatever's hard, it's good for you. Whatever's easy, it's not good for you. So, even if you have to put in hard work to learn something, it is important to do that because you need to be able to understand data. Now, it is said that official figures can also be misleading. They may not account for black economy transactions. In addition, GNI and PPP data are static and do not consider economic growth rates. So if you look at some of these old data, which is outdated, I would have to remind them to ensure that they update. Now, because I no longer work full-time, I basically just teach what material they give me, but I want you to know that you need to use the most recent data, even the data that you get from the textbook. To make a textbook, I recently published a book chapter from my research. It takes some time before the publication comes out. So when a book comes out, it's at least 2 years old, right? The data is already outdated. So it takes a while for the idea to first be generated, for you to conduct research and then gets a publication. So try to find the most recent data. So while China and India being categorized as being poor, they are growing rapidly compared to other developed nations and expected to become among the biggest, largest economies in the world. They are, very much so. Determinants of economic development. Now, it is said that we should not just look at, purely figures. We should think about the real freedom people experience. So, Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen argues that economic development should be seen as real freedoms that people experience, removal of major impediments of freedom like poverty, tyranny, and neglect of public facilities. That we need to think about basic health care and education for citizens of that country. We need to do more and allow citizens a voice. All right, so you need to think about what it means to determine the economic development of a country, what it actually determines the economic development of a country. Now, the United Nations used Sen's idea to develop the Human Development Index, HDI, based on life expectancy at birth. Now, we in many parts of the world, babies that are born not necessarily be able to survive. So we need to look at life expectancy at birth, educational attainment, and whether average incomes are sufficient to meet the basic needs of life in a country for citizens of that country. What if no matter how hard they work, they cannot even meet the basic needs of their lives? So what kind of economic level of development does the country have, truly? In terms of political and economic progress, innovation and entrepreneurship are said to be the engines of the long-term, long-run economic growth. Whether a country can actually prosper has a lot to do with how innovative, how creative the citizens of that country can be, and whether it actually fostered that way of thinking. You know, many Western countries prosper because they are able to think freely, to be able to innovate. So innovation include new products, new processes, new organizations, new management practices, new strategies. So for your product or service proposal, why don't you think creatively? What's there to stop you? Right? If you propose a wrong idea, it can never be wrong idea, right? Chances are we just ask you to resubmit, clarify your idea a bit more. Why don't you be daring? Why don't you be innovative? Why don't you be creative? Entrepreneurs commercialize innovative new products and processes. So you need to think creatively, come up with something that are different. Now, some countries, some cultures, some individuals are very creative. Others maybe less so, not because they don't want to, they haven't been brought up like that. There hasn't been that kind of encouragement. Think about your education, think about how you are socialized into your groups and what you were taught in school, even back home. The way that your tertiary education may be very different to, say, Australia. Was innovation ever encouraged? Was creativity ever encouraged? Did you once upon a time like to draw or paint? Anyone who's got artistic talents? Anyone? Yes. Do you still draw? Very good. You've got good parents there. They don't stop you from drawing. I used to want to pursue art. You know what my parents say to me? You end up on the streets. You won't have food. So as a migrant, daughter of a migrant family, I'm not encouraged with my artistic talents, right? So I didn't go and pursue a art or entertainment type of profession. And my father used to say, stop drawing, go and do some more study. So think about how you were taught, the voices, were you ever encouraged? In your company, were you encouraged for your creative endeavors, your innovative efforts? Because this is very important. Entrepreneurs need to be able to come up with new ideas, and they need to also be able to commercialize their innovative new products and services. So with your product or service proposal, be daring. Why not? Just 5%. You can resubmit anyway. If you get it wrong, right? It doesn't have to be a brand new innovation. It can be a mousetrap, but a better mousetrap, right? I'm not telling you to reinvent the wheel. It can be a wheel, but it's a better wheel. It's an alloy wheel. Just be creative. Innovation and entrepreneurship requires a market economy. It also needs to ensure that it also has to have strong property rights to protect, because you don't want to spend all this effort to create something and then someone else take it away from you. And I refer back to patents, trademarks, and all that. So there's strong relationship between economic freedom and economic growth. In fact, the countries with the highest ratings of economic freedom from 1975 to 1995 were also among the highest economic growth. So there's that interrelationship. So countries like Hong Kong, Switzerland, Singapore, the United States, Canada, and Germany. Sorry, I should correct myself. City, Hong Kong, part of China. So the countries that has the highest economic freedom were also the highest in terms of economic growth. So think about your countries of choice in your product or service proposal. What's the economy like? In terms of democracy, it can influence a country's economic growth. Now, if you have dictatorship in a country, potentially people will be afraid to speak up, people will be afraid to take risks, make mistakes, be punished, right? So you wouldn't want to take risks. And there's not much encouragement or room for innovation, entrepreneurship. Why? I turn up, I work till 5 o'clock, I get paid the same pay. Why should I be innovative? And in fact, if I make a mistake, I'll get punished. So why should I take risks? So think about the countries of your choice and why you pick those countries. Do they have economic freedom? Political freedom? Subsequent economic growth influences establishment of democratic regimes. So think about countries like South Korea, Taiwan. Think about some of the countries that have come a long way, what transformed them, what changed. So how does geography influence economic development? Now you'll find this, the more prosperous the cities are, they tend to be generally coastal cities near the coastal region, not so much inland. The inland cities are more poor because, you know, in terms of opportunities, access to outside information, you know, people inland are less able to travel as compared to, say, people around the coastal area. So there's actually a relationship between geography and economic systems and growth. Jeffrey Sachs, in his work, he found that landlocked countries grew more slowly than coastal economies. Now, in fact, being totally landlocked reduced the country's growth rate by 0.7% per year. He was able to measure it. Tropical countries grew more slowly than countries in temperate zones. So what do people have to do in those regions? They probably have to work harder, right? So, map of the world. It's not easy to run a country. Now, in the West, we often have criticisms of other countries. But hey, we have a smaller population. If you look at a country like India, 100 different languages, rich tradition, diversity, it's not easy to run a country like that. Countries like China, it's not easy. They're doing a good job. It's a continuous improvement thing. Countries that invest in education, of course, can do better, have higher growth rates because the workplace is much more productive, educated workforce, people. Countries in Southeast Asia have offset their geographical disadvantages by investing in education. You look at a country so small like Singapore. Compare Singapore to, say, Malaysia, What's the difference? How come Singapore can be Singapore that it is today? They invest in education as well, right? We know the importance of education, but how much are we investing in education? Now, it is a simplistic view to just say education is the only be-all and end-all. There's so many different things that we need to consider. But research also shows that education can transform and can help a country to develop and do so much better. So countries in the Southeast Asian area offset their geographical disadvantages by investing in education. Australia is also investing into education. We are not wanting to, and we can't, continuously relying on digging up minerals to sell to other countries. We need to grow our economy. We need to make it a knowledge-based economy. And we are trying to do more. Changing nature of political economy since the late 1980s, democratic revolution, and a move away from centrally planned to more mixed economies. You will see some of the changing trends. We are in interesting time. How free are countries politically? Some countries are very free, like you will see the ones shaded in blue, or whatever color that is, are less free. The ones shaded in light green or yellow are more politically free. The ones shaded in orange are partly free. Political freedom. How free are these countries economically? As you can see, you may not be able to see very clearly, but you can see from your own copy of the slides, the ones shaded in the light green, 80 to 100% economically free versus, say, the repressed economies between 0 to 49.9%, some of the African nations, shaded in orange. The nature of economic transformation, more and more, the shift towards a market-based system, which would involve deregulation, removal of legal restrictions to the free play of markets, establishing private enterprises, in which, and also the manner in which the private enterprises operate. Look at China. Previously many state-owned enterprises, now all privately owned. Privatization, so the transfer of ownership of state property into the hands of private investors. So the creation of a legal system is required to safeguard these property rights. That's why you may have to consider property rights and laws around that for your chosen country. Implications for managers of economic transformation. Markets that were formerly off limits to Western businesses are now open up. And so countries are taking up these opportunities to, invest into those nations. Despite being underdeveloped and poor, some markets have huge potential. Many of those African nations have reached abundance in natural resources. Many developed countries are eyeing them, potentially wanting to go in because there's huge potential. So in your choice of your countries, you might argue that at the moment, the economy may not be good, but there's huge potential for later. We want to see that you can justify, you can rationalize your choice. And in your country report later, which you work independently, individually, and submit, you need to consider comprehensively the different country factors. The economy, the legal system, the political system, the trade and foreign investment environment, the culture, and so on. Because we need to know all these in order to assess whether it's a good choice. And even if you, at the end of your country report, decide that this is actually not a good country of choice for my suggested product or service proposal, that is fine. It will not jeopardize your marks because it's your effort in producing that report. You've done it comprehensively. Even if the economy is not good, doesn't mean it's not a good report. But you're able to arrive at the conclusion at the end that the economy isn't so good. I initially thought, you might think, well, this was a good choice, but then at the end of my report, I've decided that this is not a good choice. And you talk to your group members, don't pick my country for our product or service. Let's work on yours or work on hers, because that may be a better market for our potential proposed product or service idea. Implications of the differences in political economy for managers, so countries with democratic regimes, market-based economy policies, strong property rights protections, have higher sustained rates of economic growth, are more attractive to international business, offer greater benefits, less costs and risk of doing business. In your consideration of the social cultural factors for your country report later, you will discover how different or how similar it is compared to, say, the Australian culture. Because remember, you're an Australian business based in Australia, venturing into other 3 different countries potentially. Sometimes you might wish to pick on a culture, a country that's more similar as a starting point. Sometimes you might decide to just go to some country that's totally different, and you may have reason for doing so. And it may be that your type of product or service is not yet available in that country. So you have first mover advantage. Now we'll talk a bit more about this later, the first mover advantage, first to market. Benefits of doing business in a country that's related to the market size, the purchasing power of the consumers, the likely future wealth. That's why I say you have to look at both immediate gain and over long term or medium term and longer term. Sure, it may take a couple of years before you see profit, but the potential is there. Some markets you go in immediate kind of return. Others you may have to wait, but then you can't not go in, because if you don't go in, your competitors will go in and you lose out. So you may have to think about that. How big is the market? How big is the market? Now, not immediately, but you may also wish to look at that. Let's say you're looking at a particular product going into 3 different markets. How can you justify those 3 different countries are good choices? How big is the market? This type of industry, how big is the industry in that market? If it's pharmaceutical industry, how much is the pharmaceutical industry worth per year? You can easily find this kind of data. Food and beverage, alcoholic drinks or something, right? Solar energy. How big is that industry, that market? You need to have some idea. Purchasing power of the consumers, can they even afford your products? We have some very poor nations in the world. If you propose to go into those countries, can they afford to buy your product? If you propose, I'm going to sell a premium range of products, can they even have the economic means to purchase your product? If they can't, then chances are your proposal will be rejected and will ask you to resubmit, because it doesn't make sense. So sometimes companies or firms may decide to enter into a market because they want to gain first mover advantage by identifying and investing early into the market so that they can avoid competition, they can establish their market share early. But there's first mover advantage and there's first mover disadvantage, because imagine how much you have to invest to grow that market. Sometimes you can be a market leader, sometimes you can just be a market follower. Like in the past, Telstra versus Optus, market leader versus market follower. Why do you have to be the market leader? Just let them enter the market first and then we'll see what works and then we'll copy. So whatever strategy you might wish to adopt. Now, cost of doing business also influenced by the state or political system, economic level and legal system of that country. Therefore, you need to consider all this in your country report. There's risk of doing business. Now, every so often, there's a question in the exam that asks you what are the different risks of doing business. Risk of doing business. Political risk, the likelihood of political forces, that will cause drastic changes in a country's business environment that can negatively affect the profit or other goals of the company, of the business enterprise. So you need to do your homework in assessing all this. In the real life, you pay a company to do that for you. There are companies that specialize in doing this type of research. You may not have to do it yourself, but you will still need to do some work. Economic risk, the likely risk that economic mismanagement will cause drastic changes in a country's business environment that can negatively affect the profit or other goals of the business enterprise. Less within your control, but you can try to do some planning and strategize and protect your business operations in some ways. Legal risk, the likelihood that a trading partner will opportunistically break a contract or expropriate property rights. So you need to think about the legal system, under which jurisdiction would you set up your contract, would you draw up your contract. Determining markets' overall attractiveness. So the overall attractiveness of a country is based on balancing the benefits, costs and risk associated with doing business in that country. There are benefits, but what are the costs? What are the risks? But you can't just say, well, there's risk, therefore I don't enter that market. There's risk, but there's also a lot to be gained. Maybe not immediately, but later on. And can you risk not taking on that opportunity because your competitors may potentially go in? So these are the things you have to think about. Likely to be the most favorable in politically stable developing nations that have free market systems and no dramatic upsurge in either inflation rates or private sector debt. That is why in your economic indicators, if you don't talk about inflation, the market will say, why didn't you talk about inflation rates? He should or she should talk about that. They should pick that up if you did not offer the inflation rate, if you do not discuss that. And so in order to determine the market's overall attractiveness, you could use this diagram, look at this diagram. Now remember I said last week, in the exam, you can draw diagrams, you can draw tables, you can draw pictures, but you have to explain it. Don't just draw a picture, you have to explain it. What is this picture about, right? So if the question asks you to determine, how do we determine the market's overall attractiveness for business, you may draw this. If it helps you to remember, talk about the benefits, talk about the costs, talk about the risk, what type of risk. How might we minimize some of these risks? If it helps you to learn better, draw a diagram, but explain the diagram. Chapter 5. Sorry, I have to rush a little bit. Ethics in international business. Learning objectives. Discuss ethics and social responsibility in cross-cultural and international contexts. Identify the key elements in managing ethical behaviour and social responsibility across borders. Identify some of the issues surrounding globalisation and ecological sustainability. Now, once upon a time, we always just talk about bottom line, profit. More and more, we're talking about triple bottom line. Now, if you don't know what triple bottom line means, I want you to look up that concept. Tell me next week. 3 Ps, triple bottom line. There's a video on Nike, which I could show you, but we may run out of time discussing it. So I want to set it as homework. I will ask you when I come in next week about this video. These are the questions. You click on that link, and in fact the link is also provided for you under week 3, Cloud Deacon material, learning resources. It's a short video on Nike and their treatment with employees, people that make their garments, make their products, their contract manufacturers, not themselves, but their contract manufacturers in Malaysia, mistreated their workers. You should have a look. So do you think or do you believe that Nike were acting ethically? So after you watch a video, you can comment, but be aware of the video. It may be a little bit biased. Should we as consumers be purchasing Nike's products given the evidence of abuse of workers in Malaysia? Should it be up to the media to expose these type of conditions? Should Nike have done more to prevent this from happening? If so, what should they be doing? So view the video. We'll discuss these questions first thing next week as we come in to start the class. Child labour. Now, is it right for children to work? Definitely not. Definitely not. Yet, it's a real situation, a real phenomenon in many parts of the world. Now, it will be really sad for me to think children have to work in order to survive. And not just helping out with housework, this is real hard labour. Yet it's a reality in many parts of the world. Companies like Nike have moral conscience. Oh, here we have a boy stitching a soccer ball together.
After watching this video, I regret if I ever bought anything from Nike.
After watching the video, you regret buying Nike products. Okay, so it'll be good for you to view the video. Now, Nino just offer her opinion, her what she thought after she viewed the video. You have a look for yourself. Sweatshops in many parts of the world. Would you work there? Would you like your nieces, your auntie, your mom to work there? Environmental disaster, the Octandi mine. Now, should companies prevent this type of disaster from happening? Of course, definitely. They need to do more, right? Or can they just simply just pay in compensation? We've got money, we'll pay them out later. But destroying natural environment, local communities' lives, they need to do more. So ethics. Now, if I ask you what is ethics, I think we all know, right? Ethics refer to the acceptable principles of right or wrong that governs the conduct of a person, the members of a profession, and the actions of the organization. Business ethics are the acceptable principles of right or wrong governing the conduct of business people. Ethical strategy is a strategy or course of action that does not violate these acceptable principles. Now, I also teach ethics for managers as a unit. I work with Dr. Michael Callaghan. So I have my past ethics students in the audience. So very good to see you. Now, I actually don't know how people went after that because Michael compiled the results, marked the exams, or share with me, how did you go? Another time. Now, people may say, can we really teach ethics? Do you think we can teach ethics? What do you think, Amanda? You think we can teach ethics? Yeah. Okay. You know? Yes. And you've done the ethics course. Anyone who thinks that we cannot teach ethics, you're allowed to be different. Anyone? Okay, maybe the guidelines can be taught. Is it Kevin? Yeah. What do you think? Guidelines. So some people might have the views that we can't teach people what's morally right or wrong. Because by the time we reach adulthood, our values are set. We should know what is right and what is wrong. However, in education, we hope by teaching ethics, it would increase awareness. In fact, we had a lot of fun, didn't we, in business ethics, in ethics for managers. discussing the various case studies. We had a lot of fun because we got to see what the different perspectives from people. Sometimes people don't even know that may be ethically wrong. Certain behaviours may be perfectly acceptable in one culture, but not so acceptable in another culture. Something may be acceptable in the home countries, organisations that you work for, but it may not be in another culture. So it may just increase awareness, help people to gain a better understanding of what is acceptable and what is not. And hopefully help individuals to make better decisions, because we'll all be challenged in our work lives. And we sometimes may not know that something is not ethical. Just because we're not breaking the law, it may not mean that it is ethical. The most common ethical issues in business may involve employment practices, human rights, environmental pollution, corruption, moral obligations for multinational enterprises. So if you work for multinational enterprises, what are your obligations? Ethical issues associated with employment abroad may include working conditions in the host nation that's clearly lower than your home country, the multinational's home country. What standards should then be applied? So child labour is not acceptable here. But what if, when you go to the host nation, host country, child labour exists? What do you do? In the exam, a question popped up about child labour. What would you do as a manager? Most people would just generally provide a superficial coverage to respond to that question. I will report to my seniors. I will immediately stop operation. I will sack all the workers. But have you thought about what would happen to that family of that child? Right? So issues like these are complex. It's not simple. What can we do? What else can we do? Human rights. Now, in the West, we regard human rights as very important. Now, in many parts of the world, people don't have equal human rights. So what is the responsibility of multinational enterprise when operating in a country where basic human rights are trampled upon? Okay, so what do we have to do? Environmental pollution. Now, asbestos. Do people know about asbestos? This microfiber minerals type of thing, right? They use as insulators in construction, in, I don't know, industrial equipment. Very good insulation properties. But once you start removing it, the fibers, you inhale into your lungs, it gets deposited there, and it can cause asbestosis, and later maybe even potentially lung disease like lung cancer. Now I know because I used to work in pathology. I used to work as a medical scientist. So is it right for the West to export asbestos to India? Problems that we don't want? Say in the West, is it fair to dump it to other parts of the world? Industrial waste products. So here they provide this example, but what about other waste products that we don't want to deal with? We don't want it in our backyard. Send it somewhere else. Is it right? It's not. Yet it happens. The people there processing those asbestos waste products may not wear the right mask or the right gears to protect themselves. They may not even have the knowledge. What happened to those people? What happens to those people? Moral obligation. Okay, so multinational enterprises have the power that comes with their control over resources and their ability to move production from country to country. Moral philosophers would then argue that with power comes responsibility. It's like Superman, have power, right? You know, we used to all love watching superheroes. Did you? I did. I watched every Superman movie when I was young. Wow, power. With power comes responsibilities. All right, so if you're a multinational company, you have lots of power, lots of control. What do you do? What do you do? You have a moral responsibility, social responsibility. So social responsibility refers to the idea that business people should consider the social consequences of economic actions when making business decisions. Now, advocates of this approach argue that MMEs need to recognize their kind of noblesse oblige. It's the responsibility of having benevolent behavior in terms of their operation in those countries. So with power comes responsibility, but do they really do something? Now, managers also need to confront the very real ethical dilemmas in terms of their daily lives at the workplace. Every decision they make could potentially impact on others. Now, with part of my PhD, I interview Australian managers about their experience. I research on Australian managers' experience abroad, cross-cultural business negotiation, and they share with me some very interesting stories. Sometimes it may not make business sense, but people decide to do something because of their obligations to local communities, to workers. It may not make business sense, but they want to look after their people. So ethical dilemmas may arise, and then what do you do? What decisions do you make? Do you think purely in terms of profit, bottom line, or do you think about people, society, environment? Remember to look up triple bottom line. Now, the roots of unethical behavior, there's no clear-cut reason why managers behave unethically. Now, the causes of unethical behavior can be complex. It can be our personal ethics. It can be decision-making processes in the workplace. It can be our leaders. If the leaders are not doing the right thing, they just talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. No, don't do this, don't do that, don't be corrupt, but the leaders are corrupt, then what do we do, right? Unrealistic performance expectations. They set such high expectation for you to deliver. At all costs, you must deliver. Then what do you do? Organisational culture. If it's a culture that doesn't foster care for fellow employees, if it's only focused on outcomes, chances are you don't care because you have to survive. If the culture is one that only care about research and not teaching, then do you think the tertiary institution would have good teachers? So if a culture of an organisation only focus on delivering bottom line, what's going to happen? They probably wouldn't care about the others. So these are the determinants of ethical behavior. You have the determinants of culture. This is the determinants of ethical behavior. We could ask you a question on ethics. What are the determinants of ethical behavior? So societal culture, personal ethics, organisational culture, performance goals, decision-making processes, and leadership. Okay, with not much longer to go, I've got 3 minutes of the recording left. In ethics, we study philosophical frameworks, theory that explain ethics. In the following slides, we talk about the various theories, like Friedman's, like cultural relativism, the righteous moralist theory, the naive immoralist, utilitarian perspective. Read up a bit about them because you need to understand in terms of the theory, what the theories say about ethics. I have no time right now at this moment to go through them in detail. Cognition ethics, what does it mean? Rights theories, what does it mean? So have a look. Now, United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights say all human beings are born equal, free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood or sisterhood. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. So This is what the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights say. And yet we all know that not everyone is treated the same. Ethical decision making. So here are 5 things that's set to help managers in making decisions that can be ethical. All right, so have a read of this, ethical decision making. Culture and leadership can play a role in influencing ethical behavior of an organization. More on ethical decision making processes, the steps to guide you. So I can talk a bit more about that next week. Moral courage. Sustainability, more and more we need to think about the future. How can we have a sustainable future? We can't just keep on living the way we live. So even businesses have to think about how to work more cleverly and be smarter. Reminder, your assignment proposal is due this Friday. As I say, I don't have a consultation allocated time with you. Send your messages on Cloud Deacon for the professor to address them. I wish you all the best. I look forward to reading some very interesting proposals. Okay, good luck, and make sure you submit on time on Cloud Deacon. Okay, have a great week.